If you burn down an Apache woman's home, what do you think she'll do? Cry run or turn the entire canyon into a death trap? March 15, 1879. Ironwood Canyon, New Mexico Territory. The trading post went up in a roar of violent flame as 6 mounted riders circled the lone structure like wolves around dying prey. Their silhouettes carved black against the rising inferno, shouting, laughing, firing pistols into the night sky as if celebrating some great victory. The leader wore a crimson bandana pulled tight across his face. Only his eyes showed cold and calculating, reflecting firelight like pieces of broken glass. He raised one gloved hand and the chaos stopped. 6 men, 6 horses. Perfect military discipline. "Burn it clean," the leader commanded. His voice carried the clipped precision of a man who'd spent years giving orders and expecting obedience. "Let this stand as a lesson. Nobody refuses our protection." What those 6 riders didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that the slender figure watching from the mesa above was no helpless widow clinging to fading memories. For nearly 2 decades, Nietzsche Wolfclaw had been something the Union Army whispered about in classified reports. They'd called her Mesa Ghost, a woman who could design weapons that struck with terrifying accuracy from distances others believed impossible. She stood motionless on the ridge a half-mile from the flames. In her weathered hands, she held a brass spyglass, its intricate military engravings catching starlight. Through the lens, she counted faces, memorized horses, noted the way the leader sat his mount with cavalry posture. Her breathing never changed, her hands never trembled. The fire below consumed 7 years of careful work, 7 years of building a life that looked ordinary, that felt safe, that let her believe she could be something other than a weapon. But as the flames reached the roof beam and the whole structure began to collapse, one detail cut deeper than all the rest. Through the shattered window, she saw it. The Winchester Peacemaker, custom-built, precision-engineered. The last thing she and Thomas Ashcroft had created together before an Apache raid took him one frozen winter morning 7 years past. The rifle caught fire. The walnut stock blackened. The brass fittings began to melt. Nietzsche Wolfclaw closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When they opened again, something had changed. The woman who'd spent 7 years playing shopkeeper, who'd convinced herself she could leave the war behind, who'd built a quiet life selling flour and ammunition to passing travelers, that woman was gone. What remained was Mesa Ghost. A flash of memory hit her unbidden. A younger version of herself 20 years past, standing in a dim workshop surrounded by half-finished prototypes, her hands moving with surgical precision, assembling mechanisms that would change how battles were fought. A Union general's voice echoing in the small space. "Miss Wolfclaw, if you can deliver what you're promising, you'll save 1,000 lives." She'd delivered. Over and over. Weapons that hit targets conventional rifles couldn't reach. Designs so advanced the Army ordered the blueprints burned after the war ended, too dangerous to let exist. They thought she'd complied. They thought Mesa Ghost had disappeared into history. She'd been hiding in plain sight. As the 6 riders vanished into darkness, their laughter echoing off canyon walls. Nietzsche didn't move. Her mind was already working. Inventory counts, tactical assessments, deployment sequences. She knew what those men represented, the Dread Marrow Gang. 7 core members, 30 hired guns scattered across 3 territories. A criminal empire built on fear and extortion. They'd made one fatal mistake tonight. They'd left her alive. This is the story of 6 men who burned the wrong house, and the woman who taught them the meaning of justice. Dawn came slow over New Mexico, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and rust. Marshal Roar Fenwick rode his horse carefully through the narrow trail, his weathered face set in grim lines. At 58 years old, he'd seen enough of frontier violence to know what he'd find at the trading post. Or what he thought he'd find. What he actually discovered stopped him cold. Nietzsche Wolfclaw sat on a flat rock amid the smoking ruins, calmly drinking coffee from a tin cup. She'd changed into clean clothes. Her long dark hair streaked with silver was pulled back in a practical braid. She looked like a woman having breakfast in her garden, not someone whose livelihood had been destroyed 8 hours earlier. Fenwick dismounted slowly, studying her face for signs of shock or grief. He found neither. "I heard the news in town," he said quietly. "Thought I'd find you. Crying." Nietzsche looked up at him, one eyebrow raised. "Martial Apache people don't cry over fire. We make fire." The words were delivered without heat, almost conversational, but something in her tone made Fenwick's veteran instincts prickle. He'd known this woman for nearly a decade, since before her marriage to Thomas Ashcroft. He'd attended their wedding. He'd helped bury Thomas 7 years back. But he'd also known pieces of her past, fragments, whispers, stories about a woman who'd done work for the Army during the war, work that officially never happened. "They hit you because you refused their protection money," Fenwick said, scanning the destruction. The trading post had been reduced to charred timber and ash. Nothing salvageable remained. "They attacked because I represented independent commerce." Nietzsche poured a second cup of coffee from a clay pot resting in the coals. She offered it to the marshal. "I was a crack in their monopoly, so they sealed it." Fenwick accepted the cup, noting how steady her hands were. Too steady. "Nietzsche, the Dread Marrow Gang isn't some collection of drifters. They're organized. Military discipline. They've wiped out whole families who stood against them. I know their reputation." She broke a piece of cornbread in half and handed him the larger portion. "They should have known mine." The marshal sat down on a blackened beam, studying her face in the growing light. They'd known each other long enough for honesty. "Thomas would want you safe." For the first time, something flickered behind Nietzsche's eyes. Not quite grief, not quite anger, something older and colder. "Thomas used to say the same thing." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then he'd help me plan whatever dangerous thing I was about to do anyway." They sat in comfortable silence. As the sun climbed higher, two people who'd seen enough of life to know when words were necessary and when they weren't. Around them, the canyon began to wake. Birds called. A distant coyote answered. The smell of smoke gradually gave way to sage and pinyon pine. "What are you going to do?" Fenwick finally asked. Nietzsche stood brushing ash from her skirt. She walked to the ruins and bent down, retrieving something from the debris. When she straightened, she held a piece of twisted metal. Once it had been the trigger guard of the Winchester Peacemaker. Now it was a shapeless lump. "They burned memories," she said quietly. "They destroyed the last thing Thomas and I built together." She turned the metal over in her palm. "That was their biggest mistake." "Nietzsche, I'm going to teach them a lesson, Marshal." Her voice remained calm, almost gentle. "The Apache way." Fenwick set down his coffee cup and stood. He was a tall man, hardened by decades of frontier law enforcement, but something in this woman's stillness made him uneasy, not afraid, just aware that he was watching a decision being made that couldn't be unmade. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "Time and trust." She met his gaze directly. "Can you give me both?" He thought about Thomas Ashcroft, a good man who'd loved this woman enough to leave military service and build a quiet life in the middle of nowhere. He thought about the stories he'd heard, the classified whispers about someone called Mesa Ghost. He thought about the Dread Marrow Gang and the trail of destruction they'd left across 3 territories. How much time? Enough. Nietzsche looked toward the eastern rim where the sun continued its climb. "They think they attacked a helpless widow. They'll learn differently soon enough." She turned back to face him. "There's something you should see. Follow me." So Nietzsche led Marshal Fenwick away from the ruins, following a narrow trail that wound deeper into the canyon. To most eyes, it would look like a game path, barely visible among the rocks. But Fenwick noticed how deliberately it had been maintained, how certain stones had been positioned to mark the way without being obvious. They walked in silence for 10 minutes before Nietzsche stopped at what appeared to be a solid rock face. She placed her palm against a specific outcropping and began to hum, not random noise, a song, an Apache lullaby, low and rhythmic. The sound resonated against stone. Something deep inside the rock face clicked. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a passageway. "Dear God," Fenwick whispered. Nietzsche lit an oil lamp and stepped inside. The marshal followed his hand, instinctively moving toward his sidearm before he remembered where he was and who he was with. The chamber beyond stole his breath. It stretched 30 feet across and twice that in length, carved from natural stone and reinforced with timber. The walls were lined with weapons, not a random collection, a carefully curated arsenal, 3 rifles of unusual design, 2 revolvers with custom modifications, boxes of ammunition marked with specifications that meant nothing to the marshal but everything to someone who understood ballistics. At the center stood a massive workbench covered in precision tools. Maps covered one wall marked with notes in Nietzsche's neat handwriting. Intelligence, locations, movement patterns, years of careful observation. But what drew Fenwick's attention was the photograph resting on a small shelf. Thomas Ashcroft, in his cavalry uniform, young and smiling. Beside it, a hawk feather Thomas had kept from his time learning Apache ways. "How long?" Fenwick managed. "I built the first vault before we opened the trading post." Nietzsche moved deeper into the space, lighting more lamps. The trading post was camouflage. This was always here. "The first vault." Fenwick turned to stare at her. "There are more, 6 others." She began spreading maps across the workbench, scattered throughout the canyon system, different purposes, different tools. Her fingers traced routes only she could see. "I never forgot who I was, Marshal. I just convinced myself I could be something else too." Fenwick approached the workbench slowly, studying the maps with a lawman's eye. Red marks indicated confirmed Dread Marrow sightings. Blue showed suspected hideouts. Yellow warned of vulnerable settlements. "This is military intelligence gathering," he said. "I learned from the best." Nietzsche's voice held no pride, just statement of fact. "During the war, I didn't just build weapons. I taught the Union Army how to think strategically about armament deployment." She pointed to 5 specific locations on the map. "The Dread Marrow Gang operates like a military unit because they were soldiers once. Confederate cavalry, most of them." Her finger moved from point to point. "Cuperton, their eyes and ears. 4 informants feed intelligence back to the Corps. Granite Pass, their supply line. Everything they need comes through this choke point. Eagle Point, their communications hub. Signal mirrors and message runners coordinate across territories. Thunder Mesa, where they hold prisoners for labor. Whiskey Creek Lodge, the head, where Drayson Marrow makes decisions." Fenwick studied the pattern. "You're planning to hit all of them." "Not hit." Nietzsche's amber eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "Dismantle. Make them turn on each other. Create chaos in their intelligence network. Cut their supplies, blind their communications. By the time Drayson Marrow understands what's happening, his empire will be collapsing from within." "That's not revenge," Fenwick said slowly. "That's warfare." "Revenge is emotional." Nietzsche began selecting specific items from the vault: a specialized rifle, custom ammunition, a leather satchel containing tools the marshal couldn't identify. "This is architectural correction. I'm going to take apart what they built piece by piece until nothing remains but the choice to surrender or die." She turned to face him fully. "Thomas believed I could leave Mesa Ghost behind, build things instead of destroying them. I tried. For 7 years I tried." Her hand touched the photograph gently. "But some men only understand one language, and I speak it fluently." The marshal was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "What do you need from me? Keep your patrols routine. Let them think their intimidation worked." Nietzsche secured her selections into the satchel. "When the time comes, I'll need legal authority to finish this properly. But until then, I work alone." "Not alone." The voice came from the passage entrance. Both of them turned. A man stood silhouetted against the morning light. Apache, early 40s, lean and weathered. He moved into the lamplight with the careful silence of someone who'd spent a lifetime avoiding detection. "Knox." Nietzsche's voice held surprise and something else, recognition. "I heard about the fire." Knox Tahoma stepped fully into the vault, his dark eyes taking in the weapons, the maps, the evidence of years of preparation. "Heard you might need help. This isn't your fight. Drayson Merrow killed my family at Fort Sumner in '66. Knox's voice was flat, emotionless, the kind of calm that comes from old grief processed into something harder. He called it pacification, called us savages that needed controlling. He looked at Nietzsche directly. "I know who you are. Mesa Ghost, the one who armed our enemies during the war." The words hung in the air like a challenge. "Yes," Nietzsche said simply, "I did. You also designed the weapons that saved 30 Apache scouts when they got trapped behind Confederate lines in '63. Knox crossed his arms. "My uncle was one of them. He told me about the woman who built rifles that could shoot through trees, ammunition that worked in range supplies that appeared exactly when needed." He stepped closer. "The tribe calls you traitor, but my uncle called you the reason he lived to see his grandchildren." Nietzsche's expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened slightly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Knox continued. "I'm offering partnership. You want to tear down Merrow's empire. I want him to answer for my family. Our goals align." Marshal Fenwick watched the exchange with the careful attention of a man reading a situation that could tip either way. Two Apache. Two different paths through the same painful history, both shaped by war loss and survival. "If you work with me," Nietzsche said quietly, "you follow my lead. This isn't a rampage, it's precision dismantling. I'm a scout. I know patience." Knox's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "And I know how to track, how to watch, how to move unseen." Nietzsche studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we start with Cooperton. 4 men. 4 ways to make them useless to Merrow without them knowing they've been compromised." She turned back to the maps, but Fenwick noticed the slight relaxation in her shoulders. She'd been preparing to do this alone. Now she wouldn't have to. As the 3 of them bent over the workbench planning the first strike, none of them noticed the shadow that flickered past the vault entrance and disappeared into the canyon. 200 miles south, in a lodge built from stolen lumber and territorial intimidation, Colonel Drayson Merrow sat in a room that smelled of expensive whiskey and leather polish. Every surface gleamed, every item sat at precise right angles, the kind of order that spoke of a mind desperately imposing control on a world that had long since stopped making sense. At 54, Drayson still carried himself like a cavalry officer, ramrod straight, movements economical and precise. But his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. When the dreams came at night, he woke gasping back in Glorietta Pass, watching his entire company die while he survived. Kellen Merrow, younger by 6 years and softer by nature, stood reporting on the previous night's operation. "Trading post burned clean," Kellen said. "No resistance. The woman wasn't there when we arrived." "Good." Drayson poured whiskey into a crystal glass, measuring the exact amount he always did. 2 fingers, never more. "Control. Send word to the other settlements. Compliance brings prosperity. Refusal brings ash. The men are asking if we should track the woman. Make sure she doesn't..." "Doesn't what?" Drayson's voice remained calm, but something in it made Kellen stop talking. "Cause trouble, brother. She's a widow running a failing trading post in the middle of nowhere. We destroyed her livelihood. She'll leave. Go back to whatever reservation spawned her." Kellen nodded but didn't look convinced. "She's Apache. They don't always break the way you expect." Drayson's hand tightened on his glass. Memories flooded back unbidden. Fort Sumner. The long rows of Apache prisoners. The orders to maintain control by any means necessary. The screaming. the silence that followed. "I know Apache." His voice went cold. "I spent 2 years teaching them civilization at Fort Sumner, teaching them order, structure, the benefits of proper authority." He drained the whiskey in one swallow. "One woman changes nothing." But even as he said it, something nagged at his military-trained mind. The trading post owner's name, Nietzsche Wolfclaw. Apache name. But Wolfclaw wasn't common. He'd heard it before, long ago, in a different context. After Kellen left, Drayson unlocked a drawer in his desk. Inside lay carefully preserved military records, reports from the war, intelligence summaries, names of Confederate assets and Union threats. His finger ran down columns of names until it stopped. Mesa Ghost, Union weapons designer, real name classified. Suspected Apache heritage, responsible for advanced armaments that shifted 3 major engagements. Disappeared after the war. Believed dead or relocated under federal protection, last known alias Wolfclaw. Drayson sat very still. His hands stopped trembling. The tremors that plagued him from PTSD vanished when he had a mission, a target, something to control. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote 3 words in perfect military script. "Find her. Everything." Then he rang the bell that summoned his personal tracker. Within an hour, Cole Hastings would be riding north with instructions to learn everything about the Apache woman whose trading post had burned. Back in Ironwood Canyon, Nietzsche Wolfclaw stood at the vault entrance as sunset painted the rocks in shades of blood and gold. Knox had left to scout Cuperton. Fenwick had returned to town to maintain appearances. She was alone with her weapons, her maps, and her memories. The photograph of Thomas caught the fading light. In it he was young and smiling, wearing the cavalry uniform he'd eventually resigned to marry her. A white officer who'd learned Apache language, who'd respected her people's ways, who'd seen her as more than a weapon to be aimed at the enemy. "I tried it your way," she whispered to the image. "I built instead of destroyed. I created instead of engineered death." Her fingers brushed the frame. But some men only learn through consequences, and Drayson Merrow is about to get an education. She turned back to the maps, her mind already moving through the first operation. Cuperton, 4 informants, 4 different approaches. By this time tomorrow, the dread Merrow Gang's intelligence network would begin reporting contradictions, gaps, failures, and Drayson Merrow would start to understand that he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd burned down the home of a woman who'd spent 20 years teaching armies how to win wars. Now she was going to teach him how to lose one. The sun dropped below the canyon rim. Darkness fell like a curtain, and in the shadows, Mesa Ghost began to move. 3 days after the fire, Nietzsche Wolfclaw stood in Sam Bridger's blacksmith shop, while the old man studied her with the critical eye of someone who'd spent 71 years learning to see what others missed. Sam had been Thomas Ashcroft's closest friend during the war, a Union sergeant who'd lost his left hand to Confederate grapeshot at Shiloh, but kept fighting anyway. He'd stood as witness at their wedding. He'd helped dig Thomas's grave when the time came, and he was one of 3 people in the territory who knew pieces of what Nietzsche had been before she became a shopkeeper. "You want to look like what exactly?" Sam asked, his remaining hand absently working a piece of iron on his anvil. The rhythmic clang punctuated their conversation. "A wealthy widow from Santa Fe, mestizo, someone with money to invest and no ties to this territory." Nietzsche had already changed into a burgundy dress, finer than anything the trading post owner would have worn. Someone these men would want to impress. Sam set down his hammer and really looked at her. They're going to remember an Apache woman asking questions. They'll remember Elena Morales. Nietzsche adjusted the lace collar. A woman interested in business opportunities. Someone who laughs at their jokes and pours drinks with a generous hand. The blacksmith moved to a cabinet and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside were cosmetics, the kind fancy women from Santa Fe actually wore. "My late wife's," he said quietly. "She'd want them used for a good cause." As Nietzsche applied subtle touches to alter her appearance, Sam watched with the careful attention of a man realizing he was seeing something he'd only heard rumors about. The transformation wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Just enough to shift perception to make men see what they expected rather than what was actually there. "You really think this will work?" he asked. "I know it will." Nietzsche studied her reflection in Sam's polished steel. "During the war, I walked into Confederate camps twice, once to retrieve stolen weapons specifications, once to confirm troop movements." She met Sam's eyes in the reflection. "I'm still here. They're not." Sam was quiet for a moment, the only sound his bellows breathing life into coals. "Thomas knew what you were, didn't he? I mean, really knew. Every part." Nietzsche's voice softened. "He saw Mesa Ghost and still chose to see Nietzsche. That's why I loved him. He'd tell you not to do this. He'd tell me to be careful." She smiled slightly. "Then he'd ask for details of the plan and suggest 3 improvements." Sam laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling in a barrel. "That does sound like him." He pulled out a small derringer from a drawer. "Take this, just in case conversation isn't enough." Nietzsche checked the weapon with practiced efficiency and concealed it in a hidden pocket. "I won't need it, but thank you. One more thing." Sam's weathered face grew serious. "You sure about powder in their drinks? Seems like it could go wrong fast." "Not powder. Castor oil in the stew." Nietzsche's tone was matter-of-fact. "Tasteless in beef gravy. Results are memorable. And completely non-lethal." The old blacksmith actually grinned. "You're going to give the Dread Marrow Gang's informants the runs for 3 days minimum." Nietzsche headed toward the door. "Hard to report intelligence when you can't leave the outhouse." Sam's laughter followed her into the street. Thomas would have loved this. Cooperton squatted in a valley 20 miles east of Ironwood Canyon, a mining settlement that had seen better days. 24 buildings clustered around played-out copper works, the kind of place where hope had dried up years ago, and only stubbornness remained. Vetch Calder's saloon dominated the main street, its windows glowing against the gathering dusk. Nietzsche arrived in a hired wagon, her driver an elderly Mexican man who knew nothing except he was being paid well to bring a lady to town and wait. She entered the saloon with the confident posture of a woman who'd been in 100 such places and found them all slightly beneath her standards. Not arrogant, just unimpressed. The piano player hit a sour note when she walked in. Conversation stuttered. Every eye turned to assess the unexpected appearance of quality in their weathered establishment. Nietzsche had counted on exactly this reaction. Vetch Calder himself approached, wiping his hands on a stained apron. 40 years old, running to fat with the calculating eyes of a man who'd learned to profit from other people's desperation. "Ma'am, we don't usually see ladies of your caliber in Cooperton. I'm exploring investment opportunities." Nietzsche's Spanish-accented English was perfect cultured. "I was told this region has potential for those willing to look past surface conditions." Money, the magic word. Calder's entire demeanor shifted from suspicious to accommodating in half a heartbeat. Please let me get you a table." He practically shoved 2 miners out of their seats near the window. "Can I offer you our finest whiskey? Sherry, if you have it." Nietzsche settled into the chair with practiced grace. "And perhaps you could recommend someone knowledgeable about local commerce. I find men who work the land often have the best insights." Within 10 minutes, she was surrounded. The 4 informants came like moths to lamplight, each trying to impress the wealthy widow who might bring money to their dying town. Orrin Slade arrived first, the teamster whose roots carried messages between Dread Marrow outposts. 43 years old, weathered by sun and trail dust, eager to display knowledge that might lead to employment. Brex Talon and Corin Vosick, the miners who'd sold their integrity for Marrow's gold, positioned themselves at the bar where they could watch and listen. Both former soldiers, both still moving with military awareness despite the dirt under their fingernails. And Vetch Calder himself, who brought drinks and lingered to share insights about transportation costs and supply difficulties. Nietzsche listened, asked intelligent questions, laughed at their jokes, and waited for her moment. It came when Myra Chen arrived with the evening meal. The Chinese widow who ran the boarding house carried a tray of beef stew, bread, and coffee. Her eyes met Nietzsche's for just a fraction of a second, and understanding passed between two women who'd both learned to survive in places that didn't want them. Myra set bowls in front of Talon and Vosik without comment. Standard evening meal for regulars. What the miners didn't see was the way Myra's thumb had pressed the bottom of each bowl as she set them down, releasing a measured amount of liquid from a false compartment. Castor oil, colorless, odorless when mixed with rich gravy, and absolutely devastating to digestive systems. While the miners ate, Nietzsche kept Oren Slade talking about freight routes and shipping schedules. She poured his whiskey with a generous hand, laughing at his stories, encouraging him to drink deep while she barely sipped her sherry. "You seem to know every trail in the territory," she observed. "I've ridden them all, ma'am." Slade was on his fourth whiskey, tongue loosening with each glass. "Some routes are better than others. Some you need arrangements to travel safely." Arrangements? Nietzsche's tone suggested innocent curiosity. Slade leaned closer, whiskey breath warm against her cheek. "Protection. There's an organization. They keep the road safe for those who pay." "How enterprising." She refilled his glass. "And where might one inquire about such services?" he told her. Location of message drops, names of contacts, the schedule for the next courier run to the secondary camp. Everything spilling out in booze fueled confidence to a woman who nodded and smiled and remembered every word. By the time Slade stumbled out into the night, he'd given Nietzsche a complete map of Merrow's communication network in the Eastern Territory. He'd also consumed enough whiskey that he wouldn't remember the conversation come morning. Vetch Calder was harder. The barkeep stayed behind his counter, drinking little, watching much. But Nietzsche had anticipated this. When she excused herself to visit the outhouse, she passed close to Calder's coat hanging by the door. The codebook slipped from his pocket into her hand in a movement so smooth even the careful barkeep never noticed. She was back in her seat within 3 minutes, the book now hidden in her dress, and Calder none the wiser. As midnight approached and the saloon began to empty, Myra Chen appeared at Nietzsche's elbow. "Ma'am, my boarding house has a room if you need rest before your return journey." "How kind." Nietzsche stood, leaving generous payment on the table. "Mr. Calder, thank you for your hospitality. I'll certainly consider investing in this region." Outside, the night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Nietzsche walked beside Myra in silence until they were well away from the saloon. "Those men," Myra said quietly, "they work for Merrow." "Yes." "Good." Myra's voice held satisfaction. "They've made life hard here, demanding payments, threatening anyone who complains." She glanced at Nietzsche. "You're not really looking to invest, are you?" "I'm investing in justice." Nietzsche handed Myra a small leather purse. "For your help. And your silence." Myra weighed the purse, then met Nietzsche's eyes directly. "We're not all cowards here. Some of us would stand up if we thought it would matter. It will matter soon." Nietzsche moved toward her waiting wagon. "When the time comes, I'll need witnesses, people willing to speak truth publicly." "You'll have them." As the wagon pulled away from Cooperton, Nietzsche allowed herself a small smile. 4 informants neutralized, 1 drunk and forgetful, 2 about to spend several days violently ill, and 1 missing his codebook without knowing it yet. Phase 1 complete. Knox Tahoma materialized from the darkness a mile outside town, his horse falling into step beside the wagon without startling the driver. "Smooth," he said. "You were watching, from the ridge, saw the miners stumble out, holding their bellies, an hour ago." Knox's teeth flashed white in the starlight. "Castor oil. Simple, effective, completely deniable." Nietzsche showed him the stolen codebook. "And this is worth more than all of them combined." They rode in companionable silence for a while. the wagon creaking over rough ground stars, wheeling overhead in patterns that had guided Apache travelers for generations. "The tribe used to say you forgot where you came from," Knox said eventually. "Working for the army, marrying a white soldier. I know what they said. My uncle said different, said you never forgot, said you just learned to walk in two worlds." Knox looked at her sidelong. "Said that made you dangerous, because you understood both." Nietzsche was quiet, watching the dark canyon walls rise around them. "I didn't forget," she finally said. "I just hoped I could be more than a weapon. Thomas helped me believe that." Her hand touched the code book. "But some men only respect force. Drayson Merrow is one of them. Then we speak his language." Knox nodded toward a firelight in the distance. "Sam's waiting. Said he wants to hear how it went." At Sam's forge, the old blacksmith had coffee brewing and a grin splitting his weathered face. "From the way you two aren't bleeding, I assume it went well. 4 informants down," Nietzsche confirmed. "Code book acquired. Merrow's Eastern Intelligence Network will start reporting contradictions within days." Sam poured 3 cups of coffee, the kind that could strip paint. "And tomorrow we study this." Nietzsche laid the code book on Sam's workbench. Under lamplight, the pages revealed schedules, routes, coded messages. Everything needed to understand how Drayson Merrow coordinated his criminal empire. But as she flipped through the pages, one section made her stop cold. "What is it?" Knox leaned closer. "Inventory." Nietzsche's voice had gone flat. "Of items sold to collectors back east." The list was methodical, clinical. Each item described with enough detail for buyers to know what they were purchasing. Medicine bundle Chiricahua, 50 years old, $15. War lance with coup markings, authentic Apache, $50. Child's doll, traditional beadwork, $3. The list went on, page after page, sacred items torn from her people's history and sold like cattle. "He's not just running protection schemes." Nietzsche's hands trembled slightly as she turned pages. "He's systematically looting Apache heritage, selling our culture to rich men who want exotic decorations." Knox's face had gone hard. Sam set down his cup carefully. "There's more." Nietzsche found another section. Thunder Mesa. List of laborers. She read names, Apache names, people listed like property, held against their will to work Merrow's operation. Knox made a sound low in his throat. "My brother's daughter, she's on this list. I thought she'd gone to the reservation. She's alive." Nietzsche met his eyes. "And we're going to get her out." "This changes things," Sam said quietly. "No." Nietzsche closed the book. "This makes things clearer. Merrow isn't just a criminal. He's erasing our people, our history, our children." She stood. "Granite Pass happens tomorrow as planned, but after that Thunder Mesa becomes priority." Knox nodded slowly. "Then we'd better make Granite Pass count." The 3 of them bent over maps as midnight passed into morning, planning the strike that would cut Drayson Merrow's supply lines and announce that someone was hunting him. Someone who knew exactly how to make a man bleed without him understanding where the cuts were coming from. In Whiskey Creek Lodge, Drayson Merrow woke from nightmares about Fort Sumner and reached for whiskey that wasn't there. His hands shook. His shirt was soaked with sweat. Control. He needed control. He lit a lamp and pulled out his war journals, reading his own accounts of imposing order on chaos, of teaching discipline to savages, of doing what needed to be done, even when it cost his sleep. But tonight the words felt hollow. Tonight he kept thinking about an Apache woman's name. Wolfclaw. Mesa Ghost. The tracker he'd sent hadn't returned yet. But morning would bring answers. Morning always did. Drayson Merrow had learned long ago that control was everything. Order prevented chaos. Structure defeated uncertainty. What he hadn't learned was that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who understands your structure better than you do and knows exactly where to cut to make the whole thing collapse. Knox Tahoma's shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat, but the pain was manageable now. Doc Harrigan had cleaned the wound, packed it with sage poultice, and pronounced it clean as a Sunday shirt. The bullet had passed through muscle without touching bone or artery. Apache luck, the old doctor called it. Knox called it being too stubborn to die. 3 days of rest in Sam's back room had been enough. The shoulder was stiff, not useless, and Ayesha was still imprisoned at Thunder Mesa. He could rest when she was free. Granite Pass cut through stone like a knife wound, steep walls rising 300 feet on both sides. Granite Pass cut through stone like a knife wound, steep walls rising 300 feet on both sides. Only a single wagon could pass at a time, making it the perfect choke point for commerce and the perfect killing ground for anyone who understood terrain. Nietzsche Wolfclaw understood terrain the way most people understood their own hands. She lay 712 feet above the pass on a mesa that geology had carved specifically for this moment. The morning sun hadn't yet reached the canyon floor, leaving the trail below in deep shadow while her position caught the first golden light. Through the custom scope on her Horizon rifle, she could see every pebble on the trail below, every bush, every place where a man might take cover if things went wrong. Knox Tahoma crouched 50 yards to her left, invisible against the rocks even to her trained eye. His job was simple. Create noise at exactly the right moment. Make them look west while death came from the east. They'd been in position since before dawn, bodies still despite the cold, breathing, shallow and controlled. This was the waiting that soldiers knew, the endless patience before violence. The sound reached them first. Wagon wheels grinding over stone, horses blowing hard from the climb, men's voices carrying in the thin air with that particular carelessness that came from believing you owned the territory you traveled. Through her scope, Nietzsche counted 6 wagons, 12 outriders, military spacing, professional discipline, and leading them riding a gray gelding with the posture of a cavalry officer, Kellen Merrow. Drayson's younger brother looked nothing like the hard-edged gang leader. Softer features, thoughtful eyes. The kind of man who might have been a teacher or a clerk if the war hadn't twisted his path. But he wore a Confederate officer's hat, faded gray from years and weather, and he commanded these men with the casual authority of someone born to it. Nietzsche watched him through the scope and felt nothing, not hate, not pity, just the cold calculation of a craftsman measuring a problem. The convoy entered the narrowest section of the pass, walls pressing close, no room to maneuver, exactly where she needed them. Knox's diversion came right on schedule. A flash of fire on the western ridge, bright enough to draw every eye, loud enough to sound like trouble but not quite like gunfire. Every guard's head snapped west. Kellen Merrow barked orders, his voice sharp with sudden tension. 4 riders peeled off to investigate. Nietzsche's finger touched the trigger. Her breathing stopped. The world narrowed to the single point where crosshairs met the wooden axle of the ammunition wagon. She fired. The Horizon rifle made almost no sound, a whisper, a breath. Nothing that would carry to the men below. The bullet traveled faster than the ear could track a piece of precisely engineered death, covering 700 feet in less than a second. It struck the axle exactly where Nietzsche had aimed, not the wheel, not the wagon bed. The single point where the entire structure's weight balanced on aging wood and iron. The axle didn't explode. It cracked, a sound like a tree limb breaking. The wagon lurched sideways, tipped, and ammunition boxes began sliding toward the cliff edge. Men shouted. Horses reared. Kellen Merrow was already moving his military training, kicking in, trying to control chaos that had erupted from nowhere. That's when Knox triggered the second part of their plan. A carefully placed charge, small and precise, sent rocks tumbling down the western wall. Not an avalanche, just enough to look like the pass itself was collapsing. Now the convoy faced disaster from 2 directions, a crippled wagon blocking the trail ahead, falling rock behind, And somewhere in the mathematical precision of it all, a threat they couldn't see or identify. Kellen Merrow made his choice in seconds. Abandon the damaged wagon, secure what ammunition could be salvaged, get his men and remaining supplies out of the kill zone. It was the right tactical decision. It was also exactly what Nietzsche had predicted he'd do. As the convoy scrambled to reorganize, she tracked Kellen through her scope. He'd dismounted, moving among his men with the calm focus of a leader who'd seen combat before, checking injuries, assessing damage. His hat had fallen off during the chaos. She could have killed him. One shot, 700 feet. She'd made harder ones during the war. Instead, she fired into the cliff face above his head. Rock fragments showered down. Nothing lethal, just a message. I see you. I could have killed you. I chose not to. Kellen Merrow froze. His eyes scanned the eastern ridge, searching for a shooter he had no chance of spotting. The other men dove for cover, firing blindly at shadows, wasting ammunition, revealing their panic. But Kellen stood still, and Nietzsche saw the moment understanding hit him. This wasn't a robbery. This wasn't random violence. This was precision. This was someone who knew military tactics, someone who could have slaughtered them all, but chose disruption instead. Someone dangerous. Nietzsche and Knox were gone before the first rider reached the base of the mesa. They moved through terrain only Apache could navigate, over stone that left no tracks, through gaps in the rock that looked impassable to eyes trained in gentler country. By the time Kellen Merrow's men reached the shooting position, they found nothing but a few brass casings and a view that made grown men dizzy. 2 miles away, in a dry wash that hid them from any pursuit, Nietzsche and Knox finally stopped. "Clean," Knox said. It was the highest praise he gave. One wagon destroyed, supply line disrupted, no deaths. Nietzsche disassembled the horizon with practiced movements. Kellen will report to his brother that they're facing someone trained, someone who fights like a soldier, and that bothers Drayson more than losing supplies. Much more. Nietzsche secured the rifle components in their case. Control is everything to him. This tells him he's lost it. They rode east, keeping to high ground where vision extended for miles. Neither spoke for an hour, both of them listening to the land the way their ancestors had, hearing what the wind and birds told them about pursuit. There was none. The Merrow convoy was too damaged, too disorganized to give chase. They'd limp back to Whiskey Creek with their wounded pride and incomplete cargo. But as the sun climbed toward noon, Knox's horse suddenly tensed. Nietzsche felt it too, that prickle between the shoulder blades that came from being watched. "Tracker," Knox breathed. They were still half a mile from Eagle Point when Cole Hastings stepped from behind a boulder. He wasn't pointing a weapon, wasn't threatening, just standing there like he'd been waiting for hours and had all day to continue. 35 years old, Dakota-born, face like weathered leather, eyes that missed nothing. "You're good," Cole said conversationally. "Took me 3 days to figure out your pattern." Nietzsche and Knox sat their horses' hands near weapons, but not touching them. This man was dangerous in a different way than Merrow's thugs. He was competent. "Merrow paying you well?" Nietzsche asked. "Well enough." Cole's gaze moved between them, cataloging details. "You're Apache, late 40s, military training and weapons design based on that rifle." He looked at Knox. "You're local, scout background, related to someone Merrow hurt at Fort Sumner based on the way you carried yourself at Thunder Mesa last week." Knox's eyes narrowed. "You've been watching longer than 3 days." "I'm thorough," Cole shrugged. "That's why people hire me." "Why haven't you told Merrow?" Nietzsche's voice remained calm, curious. "Because I'm still deciding if his money's worth dying for." Cole pushed away from the boulder. "You two aren't amateurs. You're not going to stop until Merrow's finished. And frankly, the man's half crazy. Talks to ghosts from the war, sees enemies in shadows." "So you're here to negotiate," Nietzsche said. "I'm here to give you information." Cole pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Location of the Apache prisoners at Thunder Mesa, guard schedules, weak points in the perimeter." He tossed it to Knox. "Consider it professional courtesy between people who know what they're doing." "Why?" Knox caught the paper, but didn't look at it, keeping his eyes on the tracker. "Because I don't work for men who steal children." Cole's voice went flat. "I track fugitives, hunt bounties. But what Merrow's doing at Thunder Mesa, that's not business. That's something else." He turned to leave, then paused. "I'll tell him I lost your trail at Eagle Point. Buy you a day or two. After that, I can't help." He disappeared into the rocks before either of them could respond. Knox opened the paper. His hands shook slightly as he read. "My niece. She's alive." He marked where they're keeping her. Nietzsche studied the information. Detailed. Accurate. The kind of intelligence that would cost lives if it was wrong, but save them if it was right. "We can't trust him completely." "No, but we can verify." Knox looked toward Eagle Point, visible now in the distance. After tonight's operation, Eagle Point rose like a cathedral spire, 300 feet of vertical stone, topped by a flat summit, barely large enough for the signal station the Merrow gang had built. It was their communications hub, allowing them to coordinate across territories using mirror flashes by day and lantern codes by night. Taking it would blind Drayson Merrow worse than destroying 100 supply wagons. The problem was getting up there. The only trail was a switchback on the south face, heavily guarded and impossible to approach undetected. But Nietzsche hadn't planned to use the trail. The north face was considered unclimbable. Sheer stone, no obvious handholds, the kind of wall that made experienced climbers look elsewhere, which was exactly why she'd spent 2 years developing the spider harness. As darkness fell, she and Knox stood at the base of the north face, wearing contraptions of leather and steel that looked like instruments of torture. "Your husband tested these?" Knox asked skeptically. "Thomas weighed 200 pounds and climbed the same wall 3 times. Nietzsche checked Knox's harness with expert hands. "The mechanism redistributes weight through tension. Trust the engineering." "I trust you." Knox touched the stone. "Just not gravity." They began to climb. The harnesses worked through a system of carefully placed anchors and mechanical advantage, allowing them to ascend stone that should have been impossible. Each movement was deliberate. Each anchor placement tested 3 times before committing weight. At the 100-foot mark, a stone shifted under Knox's boot. It tumbled down, clicking against rock, the sound impossibly loud in the night silence. They froze. Above them, lantern light appeared at the cliff edge. A guard investigating. The light swept out, searching. Nietzsche pressed herself flat against the stone, her dark clothing blending with shadow. Knox did the same 20 feet to her right. The guard stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 2 minutes. Then the light withdrew. They climbed on, inch by careful inch. The wind rose as they ascended, pulling at their clothes, testing their grip. Nietzsche's arms burned. Her fingers ached, but the harness held and the stone accepted their weight, and gradually the summit drew closer. At 270 feet, Knox's harness made a sound. Not loud, just a tiny ping of metal under stress. "Keep moving," Nietzsche whispered. "We're almost there." The final 30 feet took forever. Every handhold evaluated, every movement controlled. And then finally Nietzsche's fingers found the summit edge. She pulled herself up and over, rolling into shadow. Knox came next, his breathing hard but controlled. They lay still for a moment, letting their bodies recover, listening to the voices of the guards 50 feet away. The signal station was simple. A central fire pit, coated lanterns for night signals, polished mirrors for day work. A locked box containing code books, 4 guards, rotating watch, professional setup. Nietzsche didn't need to fight them. She just needed 20 minutes alone with that code box. From her pack, she withdrew something that looked like an ordinary canteen. It wasn't. Inside was a mixture she'd developed during the war. Odorless, tasteless when mixed with coffee or water, and absolutely devastating to alertness. The guards changed watch at midnight. The new pair settled by the fire with coffee. Knox created a small distraction on the western approach, nothing serious, just enough to draw their attention for 30 seconds. That was all the time Nietzsche needed to pour the mixture into their coffee pot. Then they waited, hidden in rocks, patient as stone. Within 20 minutes, both guards were yawning. 30 minutes, their heads were nodding. 45 minutes, they were sound asleep by a fire that would keep them warm until dawn. Nietzsche moved to the code box. The lock was good, but not military grade. She had it open in 90 seconds. Inside were the communication schedules, signal protocols, and coordination codes that allowed Marrow to run an empire across 3 territories. She didn't steal them. That would reveal the breach immediately. Instead, she modified them. Changed coordinates by small degrees, altered signal meanings subtly, switched meeting times by hours instead of days. The kind of errors that would look like transcription mistakes but would compound into chaos. When she was done, no one would be able to prove the codes had been tampered with. But starting tomorrow, Marrow's communication network would begin generating contradictions and confusion that would spread like poison through his organization. They descended the same way they'd climbed, slower now, exhaustion pulling at muscles, but the rope held, the harnesses worked, and by the time the drugged guards woke with pounding headaches and no memory of falling asleep, Nietzsche and Knox were miles away. Father Miguel Santos found Nietzsche sitting in the last pew of his small church as dawn painted the stained glass windows in colors that had comforted frontier Catholics for 30 years. He wasn't surprised. People came to churches for many reasons, and sanctuary was one of the oldest. "You're safe here," he said quietly, settling into the pew beside her. "I know." Nietzsche's eyes were closed, her hands folded, but not in prayer. "Just rest. Are you running from something or towards something? Does it matter?" Father Miguel was 61 years old. He'd been chaplain at Fort Sumner during the Apache imprisonment. He'd witnessed horrors that still woke him at night. And he'd learned that sometimes silence said more than confession. "I knew Drayson Marrow before the war broke him," the priest said eventually. "He was a good man once, believed in order, in protecting the innocent." What happened? Glory at a pass. He watched his entire company die while he survived. Something in him cracked. Miguel's weathered hands gripped the pew in front of them. At Fort Sumner, he convinced himself that controlling your people would prevent future violence, that cruelty in the name of order was mercy. Nietzsche opened her eyes. "You're telling me to forgive him. I'm telling you to understand him." The priest met her gaze. The war destroyed many men in different ways. Some became monsters. Some became victims. Marrow became both. And that excuses what he's doing. Nothing excuses it. Miguel stood slowly, his knees protesting. But understanding your enemy is different than forgiving them. One makes you effective, the other makes you free. He brought her bread and coffee from the rectory. They sat in silence, while the sun climbed higher and the church filled with colored light. "There are children at Thunder Mesa," Nietzsche said finally, "Apache children, being held as laborers." Miguel's face went pale. "Dear God, I'm going to get them out, but I'll need witnesses after, people willing to testify about what Marrow's done." "You'll have them." The priest's voice was firm. "Half this territory is tired of living under his thumb. They just needed someone to show them resistance was possible." He looked at her directly. "You're that someone." Nietzsche finished her coffee and stood. "Thank you, Father." "For what? Coffee and conversation. For reminding me why I'm doing this." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thomas used to say that faith wasn't about believing in God. It was about believing people could be better than their worst moments. Your husband was a wise man." He was. Nietzsche stepped into the morning sunlight. "I hope he's right." As she rode back toward Ironwood Canyon, she thought about the pieces now in motion. Cooperton's informants neutralized, Granite Pass supply line broken, Eagle Point communications corrupted, each strike carefully calibrated to create maximum confusion while maintaining deniability. But Thunder Mesa was different. You couldn't rescue prisoners subtly. That would require direct action. Risk. the possibility of death. And it would announce to Drayson Merrow that whoever was hunting him had just escalated from harassment to war. Nietzsche touched the rifle secured to her saddle, felt the weight of decisions made and violence yet to come. Some men only learned through consequences. Drayson Merrow was about to get an education he'd never forget if he survived it. The wounds that matter most are the ones you don't see coming. Knox Tahoma had been shot before, twice during his years as an Army scout. Once by accident when a drunk miner mistook him for someone else. He knew the feeling of a bullet entering flesh, the shock that came before pain, the way your body tried to pretend nothing was wrong for exactly 3 seconds before reality crashed in. The guard's bullet caught him high in the left shoulder as he and Nietzsche descended from Eagle Point. One of the sentries they'd drugged had woken early, spotted movement on the cliff face, and fired blind into the darkness. One moment Knox was moving with the confidence of someone who'd navigated these canyons his entire life. The next, something punched through muscle and spun him against the rock face. He didn't cry out. That was training. But Nietzsche heard the wet sound of impact, the change in his breathing, and she was there in seconds. How bad? Her hands were already moving, assessing damage with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd treated battlefield wounds. Through and through. Knox's voice was tight but controlled. Missed bone. I can ride. You're losing blood. I've lost more. Nietzsche pulled supplies from her pack, working quickly in the darkness. Clean cloth, whiskey for disinfection. Her hands moved with practiced certainty, binding the wound tight enough to stop bleeding, but not so tight it would cut circulation. Cole Hastings, Knox said through gritted teeth. Had to be. Only tracker good enough to find us. He said he'd buy us time. Maybe he changed his mind, or maybe Merrow's paying better than we thought. Nietzsche finished the bandage and helped Knox to his feet. He swayed, but caught himself. We need to move. If Cole's really hunting us, he's not alone. They made it back to Sam Bridger's forge as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. The old blacksmith took one look at Knox's pale face and blood-soaked shirt and moved into action without questions. Inside the shop, with the door barred and lamplight revealing the extent of the damage, Sam heated water while Nietzsche cleaned the wound properly. Knox sat on a workbench, his jaw clenched, saying nothing as she worked. You're lucky, she said quietly. Another inch to the right, and it would have hit the artery. I'm Apache. We're always lucky. Knox managed a weak smile. Until we're not. Sam brought coffee laced with whiskey. Knox drank it in one long swallow. You can't ride for at least 3 days, Nietzsche said. Maybe longer. Thunder Mesa can't wait 3 days. Thunder Mesa will wait as long as it takes for you to heal. Her voice carried the kind of authority that didn't invite argument. I'm not losing you to infection or blood loss because you're too stubborn to rest. Knox started to protest, then saw her face. Something in her expression reminded him of his own mother, years dead, who'd used that same look when one of her children was being idiotic. You're worried about me, he said, surprised. Of course I'm worried. Nietzsche began preparing a poultice using herbs she carried for exactly this purpose. I already lost Thomas. I'm not losing my brother, too. The word hung in the air between them. Brother. Not cousin, not ally, not fellow warrior. Brother. Knox's eyes went bright for a moment. The tribe called you traitor for so long I forgot you're still one of us. I never stopped being Apache. Nietzsche applied the poultice with gentle hands. I just learned to be other things as well. Thomas taught me that. You can be many things at once without betraying any of them. Sam cleared his throat from across the room where he was pretending not to listen. Speaking of people standing with you, had some visitors yesterday. Who? Myra Chen, Doc Harrigan, a few others from Cooperton. Sam's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. Word spreading about what happened at Granite Pass. People are talking. Talking is dangerous, Nietzsche said. Talking is hope. Sam poured more coffee. These folks have been under Merrow's thumb for years, paying protection money, watching friends disappear, seeing their children grow up afraid. He met her eyes. You're showing them someone can fight back. That matters. I'm one person. You're a symbol, Knox said quietly, and symbols change things. Before Nietzsche could respond, a soft knock came at the door. 3 taps paused, 2 more. Sam's signal for friends. The blacksmith opened the door to reveal Myra Chen, Doc Harrigan, and 8 others. Townspeople, farmers, shopkeepers, the kind of ordinary folks who built communities and asked nothing except to be left in peace. Myra spoke for them. We want to help. Nietzsche studied their faces in the lamplight. Fear and determination mixed in equal measure. This isn't your fight. It became our fight when Merrow started demanding payments we couldn't afford. Doc Harrigan was 64, white-haired, with hands that shook slightly from age but still had strength in them. When he threatened our families, when he made it clear we'd never be free of him. I'm not building an army, Nietzsche said carefully. We're not soldiers. A farmer named Peterson stepped forward. He was 40-something, with dirt under his nails and calluses that told the story of hard work. But we can watch, we can listen, we can provide shelter when you need it. And we can be witnesses, Myra added. When the time comes to bring Merrow to justice, you'll need people willing to testify. We'll do that. Nietzsche looked at Knox, who gave a slight nod, then at Sam, who was grinning openly now. All right, she said finally, but you follow my rules. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. And if I tell you to run, you run. We're not fighters, Doc Harrigan agreed. We're survivors. We know when to bend and when to break. Good. Nietzsche moved to Sam's workbench, where maps were already spread. Then here's what I need. For the next hour she outlined a network, not of warriors, but of ordinary people doing ordinary things while keeping their eyes open. The stableman who'd notice unfamiliar horses, the bartender who'd overhear conversations, the seamstress who'd see which men were buying new clothes, suggesting they'd come into money. It was intelligence gathering the way Nietzsche had learned during the war, not through spies and subterfuge, but through communities protecting themselves. As the townspeople dispersed back to their homes before daylight revealed their gathering, Doc Harrigan lingered. I treated a gunshot wound last week, he said quietly. Man from Merrow's crew. He was scared, said something was hunting them, said 4 of their informants got sick the same night, said their supply wagons keep having accidents. Coincidence, Nietzsche said mildly. Of course. Doc's eyes twinkled. But coincidences are stacking up, and Drayson Merrow is the kind of man who sees patterns even when they're not there. Makes him paranoid, makes him dangerous, makes him predictable, Nietzsche corrected. A paranoid man pulls his forces tight, consolidates. That's when he's most vulnerable. Doc studied her for a long moment. Thomas was a good man. He'd be proud of what you're doing. He'd tell me I was being reckless. He'd be right, but he'd help you anyway. The old doctor moved toward the door. That's what love is, supporting someone even when you're terrified for them. After he left, Knox spoke from his perch on the workbench. They're risking everything to help us. I know. We can't fail them. We won't. Sam banked the forge fire and brought blankets. Knox needed rest, his body fighting blood loss, and the beginning of infection, despite Nietzsche's treatment. She stayed awake, checking his wound every hour, applying fresh poultices, making sure fever didn't set in. As dawn broke, properly painting Sam's forge in shades of rose and gold, a new visitor arrived. Red Sky Walker was 68 years old and moved like water over stone. An Apache elder who'd survived the long walk to Fort Sumner and back, who'd buried 3 wives and seen his children scattered across the Southwest. He carried wisdom in every line of his weathered face. Nietzsche rose to greet him with the respect due an elder, but Red Sky waved her back to Knox's side. The young one needs you more than old bones need ceremony, he said in Apache. His voice was like wind through canyon rocks worn smooth by years but still strong. Uncle, Knox tried to sit up straighter. You shouldn't be here. If Marrow's people see you with us, let them see." Red Sky settled onto a stool with the careful movements of age. "I'm too old to care what white men think of where I go." He studied Knox's wound with experienced eyes, then nodded approval at Nietzsche's treatment. "You learned our medicine well, better than most who left for the white world." "I never forgot," Nietzsche said quietly. "No, you didn't." Red Sky's gaze was penetrating. "The tribe said you abandoned us, chose their weapons over our ways. But I remember different. I remember a young woman who saved 30 of our scouts by designing ammunition that worked in rain. I remember supplies that appeared exactly when our people needed them most." He reached into the leather bag at his side and withdrew something wrapped in soft deerskin. "The elders asked me to bring you this, as apology for calling you traitor, as thanks for what you did then, and what you're doing now." Nietzsche unwrapped the deerskin with trembling hands. Inside was an eagle feather perfectly preserved, bound with traditional beadwork and patterns that identified it as coming from the Chiricahua band. "This is—" her voice caught. "Recognition." Red Sky's weathered hand touched hers gently. "You are welcome home, daughter. You always were. We just forgot to tell you." For the first time since the trading post burned, Nietzsche's composure cracked. Not sobs, not theatrical grief, just silent tears tracking down her face while she held the feather like it was made of light. Knox reached out with his good arm and squeezed her shoulder. Sam turned away suddenly, very interested in organizing tools that were already perfectly organized. "There's more," Red Sky said when Nietzsche had composed herself. "Bad news that you need to hear." He told them about Thunder Mesa, about the 8 Apache prisoners being held as forced labor, about conditions that violated every treaty ever signed, and about the young girl among them. "She's 12 years old," Red Sky said, looking at Knox. "Your brother's daughter, taken 6 months ago when she went to gather herbs. We thought she'd been killed. We mourned, but she lives." Knox's face went absolutely still, the kind of stillness that comes before explosion or collapse. "Her name," his voice was barely a whisper, "Ayasha, she who lives." Knox put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook silently. Nietzsche placed the eagle feather carefully aside and moved to kneel in front of Knox. "We're getting her out. All of them. I promise you." When Knox's voice was raw, "Soon as you can ride. 3 days, maybe 4. She gripped his shoulders. "But we do this right. We plan, we prepare. We don't rush in angry and get everyone killed." "The tracker gave us information," Knox said. "Guard schedules, weak points, which we'll verify before we trust." Nietzsche stood. "Red Sky, can your people watch Thunder Mesa Count guards confirm the prisoner location? Already being done." The elder's eyes held grim satisfaction. "We're not as broken as Marrow thinks, not as helpless." "Good." Nietzsche returned to the maps. "Then here's what we're going to do." She laid out the plan with the precision of someone who'd orchestrated military operations. Not a frontal assault, not a bloodbath, a surgical extraction using distraction timing and the kind of intimate knowledge of terrain that only Apache possessed. Sam would create a diversion with dynamite at the mine entrance, not to kill, just to pull guards away from the prisoners. Knox, despite his wound, would lead the prisoners out through a back route only locals knew existed, and Nietzsche would provide cover dealing with any guards who didn't take the bait. "It's not perfect," she admitted. "Too many variables, too much that could go wrong." "But it's a chance," Knox said. "More than those children have had in months." Red Sky listened to the entire plan, then nodded slowly. "You think like Apache. Like someone who understands that saving one life matters more than killing 10 enemies." "I learned that from Thomas," Nietzsche said. "He believed every life had value, even our enemies." "Your husband was wise, but he's gone." Red Sky stood preparing to leave. "The question now is what you believe." Nietzsche looked at the eagle feather, at Knox with his bandaged shoulder, at Sam with his missing hand and iron will, at the maps showing Thunder Mesa and the children trapped there. "I believe some things are worth fighting for," she said, "and some things are worth dying to protect." "Good." Red Sky moved toward the door, because what's coming will test both those beliefs. After he left, the three of them sat in silence. The plan was made, the decision final. In 3 days, maybe 4, they'd hit Thunder Mesa and announce to Drayson Merrow that the ghost hunting him had teeth. Outside Ironwood Canyon woke to another day. Ordinary people going about ordinary lives, unaware that the balance of power in 3 territories was about to shift. Inside Sam's forge, a widow, a wounded scout, and a one-handed blacksmith prepared for the kind of violence that changes everything. Knox broke the silence finally. "My niece, Ayasha. She's probably terrified." "Then we bring her hope," Nietzsche said. "We show her that family doesn't abandon family, that Apache take care of their own. Even the ones the tribe called traitor," Nietzsche touched the eagle feather, "especially those." 3 days. That's all the time they had to heal to plan to prepare for the operation that would either free 8 prisoners or get them all killed. 3 days before Thunder Mesa. 3 days before Drayson Merrow learned that the woman whose home he'd burned was coming for everything he'd taken. And she was bringing an army of ordinary people who'd finally found someone worth standing behind. 3 days can feel like forever when you're waiting to save a child's life. Knox Tahoma healed faster than Nietzsche expected, driven by the kind of determination that made doctors shake their heads and mothers pray. By the 2nd day, he was on his feet. By the 3rd, he was insisting he could ride and shoot and do whatever needed doing. Nietzsche made him prove it. She set up targets in the canyon and watched him fire with his wounded shoulder. The first 3 shots went wide. The 4th clipped the edge. The 5th hit center. "Good enough," she said. "Good enough to get my niece killed. Good enough to save her life." Nietzsche handed him a fresh box of ammunition. "Pain makes you careful. Careful keeps you alive." They gathered at Sam's forge the night before the raid. Not an army, just 7 people who decided that enough was enough. Nietzsche Wolfclaw, Knox Tahoma, Sam Bridger, and 4 townsmen who'd volunteered despite having no military experience. Peterson the farmer, young Jake Mills, barely 20, who worked at the stable. Old Tom Chen Myra's father-in-law, who'd survived the railroad camps and knew something about enduring impossible conditions. And Father Miguel Santos, who insisted that bearing witness was part of his calling. "This isn't a Sunday school outing," Nietzsche warned them. "Men will die tomorrow. Maybe us, maybe them, maybe both." "We understand," Peterson said quietly. The farmer's hands were steady despite the fear in his eyes. "My daughter is 16, same age as some of those prisoners. If it was her," he didn't need to finish. They all understood. Nietzsche spread the map of Thunder Mesa across Sam's workbench one final time. Red Skywalker's scouts had spent 3 days watching, counting, confirming. The intelligence was solid. 8 guards rotate in 12-hour shifts, she said. 4 on duty at any time. 2 at the main entrance. 1 walking the perimeter. 1 with the prisoners. Her finger traced the layout. "The prisoners are kept in a converted storage building here. Stone walls, single door, 1 window too small for adults but perfect for children." "That's our extraction point," Knox said, leaning over the map despite the pull of his shoulder wound. "Jake goes through the window, unlocks the door from inside. We get them out while Sam's creating chaos at the mine entrance." "What about Cole Hastings?" Father Miguel asked. "If the tracker is working for Merrow again—" "Then I deal with him." Nietzsche's voice was flat. "You focus on the prisoners. I'll handle any complications." Sam checked the dynamite charges he'd prepared. Small, precise, enough to make noise and smoke without bringing down the whole mountainside. "These'll give you 5 minutes of confusion, maybe 10 if we're lucky." 5 is enough." Nietzsche began distributing weapons. Not military rifles, mostly hunting pieces and revolvers that wouldn't look out of place on a frontier farm. "Remember, we're not here to fight. We're here to rescue. Every bullet you don't fire is a victory." As midnight approached and the men settled in for a few hours of rest before the pre-dawn ride, Knox found Naiche standing outside looking toward Thunder Mesa's distant silhouette. "You think she'll remember me?" he asked quietly. "Ayasha. She was 7 when I saw her last." "She'll remember." Naiche didn't look at him. "Family is bone deep, even when everything else breaks that remains. Thomas taught you that. My mother did, before the long walk, before Fort Sumner." Naiche's hand touched the eagle feather she now wore in her hair, woven into her braid with traditional binding. "She said blood calls to blood across any distance. I didn't believe her then, and now I'm riding into gunfire to save children who aren't mine by blood, but are mine by choice." She finally looked at Knox. So maybe she was right. They rode out 2 hours before dawn, 7 riders moving through darkness with the careful silence of people who understood that noise meant death. The moon was a sliver, giving just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to reveal their approach. Thunder Mesa rose from the desert floor like a broken tooth, all sharp edges and exposed rock. Mining operations had carved into it for 30 years, leaving a maze of tunnel shafts and unstable ground. The Marrow Gang had taken over abandoned sections, using the natural fortress qualities to hide their illegal activities, including the imprisonment of 8 Apache people, whose only crime was being in the wrong place when Drayson Marrow needed labor. Naiche led them to a position half a mile out where a rise in the ground provided cover and visibility. Through her spyglass, she counted guards, watched their patterns, confirmed what Red Sky scouts had reported. 4 guards, rotating exactly as intelligence suggested, professional but not paranoid. Men doing a job they'd done so many times it had become routine. Routine was the enemy of alertness, and today that would cost them. "Sam, you're up in 15 minutes, Naiche said quietly, checking her pocket watch. "Jake Knox, you move on the explosion. Father Miguel and the others, you provide distraction at the west approach if needed." "And you?" Peterson asked. "I'll be where I need to be when I need to be there." She checked her weapons one final time. The veil, 2 revolvers, a knife that had been Thomas's. "If shooting starts, get the prisoners out first. Worry about me second." Sam moved off toward the mine entrance, carrying his charges and a slow-burning fuse. The old blacksmith moved with surprising grace, for a man missing a hand using terrain the way soldiers did, making himself small against the landscape. The rest of them waited, seconds crawling past like hours, hearts beating loud enough to wake the dead. Then thunder rolled across the mesa. Sam's dynamite went up in a roar of sound and fury, blasting rock and smoke into the pre-dawn air. Not the mine entrance itself. Sam was too precise for that. But close enough to sound like a collapse, close enough to send every guard running toward potential disaster. Knox and Jake Mills were already moving. The young stable hand went through the small window like water, his slight build an advantage for once. 30 seconds later, the door clicked open from inside. 8 Apache prisoners stumbled out, blinking in the sudden chaos. Men and women ranging from teenagers to elders, malnourished, exhausted, but alive. And among them, a 12-year-old girl with eyes like her uncle's. "Ayasha." Knox's voice cracked on her name. The girl's head whipped around. Recognition flashed across her face. Uncle Knox! He was there in 3 strides, dropping to his knees, pulling her into his good arm, while the bad shoulder screamed protest he ignored completely. Ayasha buried her face in his chest, and finally, after 6 months of captivity and terror, allowed herself to cry. "I've got you," Knox whispered in Apache. "You're safe now. I've got you." Naiche provided cover from higher ground, her rifle tracking the perimeter. 2 guards had responded to Sam's explosion. The 3rd was running back from the west approach. The 4th appeared from an unexpected angle, and Naiche recognized him instantly. Cole Hastings. The tracker stood between them and the escape route, rifle in hand, but not raised. His eyes found Naiche's position with the uncanny accuracy of someone who made his living reading terrain and anticipating movement. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Cole did something that surprised everyone. He turned his back on the fleeing prisoners and fired 3 shots toward the mine entrance. Warning shots, drawing the other guards' attention away from the real escape. When he turned back, his eyes met Nietzsche's across 50 yards of broken ground. He touched his hat brim in a gesture that might have been respect or farewell. Then he vanished into the rocks. "Move," Nietzsche hissed to Knox. "He won't cover for us twice." They ran. Not a dignified retreat, just desperate flight through terrain that tried to kill you if you weren't careful. The 8 prisoners struggled with legs weakened by captivity. Father Miguel and Peterson half-carried an elderly woman. Jake Mills led them through gaps in the rock only a local would know existed. Behind them shouts echoed, guards realizing what had happened, guns firing blindly into the dawn. But Nietzsche had chosen the escape route carefully. By the time the guards organized a pursuit, their quarry had disappeared into canyon country that swallowed Apache people the way night swallowed stars. 3 miles from Thunder Mesa in a sheltered wash where water sometimes ran and shelter was guaranteed, they finally stopped. Knox still held Ayesha. The girl clung to him like he was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid. The other prisoners collapsed in exhausted relief, unable to quite believe they were free. Father Miguel moved among them, offering water, speaking quiet reassurances. Sam appeared from a different direction, grinning despite the soot covering his face. "Made a hell of a noise," the blacksmith reported. "Half the mesa probably heard it." "Good." Nietzsche was already planning their next move. "We need to get them to safety before Merrow organizes a real search." An elderly Apache man approached her. His face carried the kind of weathered dignity that came from surviving things that killed most people. "You're the one they call Mesa Ghost." "I'm Nietzsche Wolfclaw." "I know who you are." The man's eyes were clear despite exhaustion. "My grandson was one of the scouts you saved during the war. He told me about the woman who built weapons that worked miracles." He placed his hand over his heart in the traditional gesture of deep respect. "You were never a traitor. You were what we needed you to be. Thank you for becoming what we needed again." Nietzsche felt something crack inside her chest. The words she'd needed to hear for 20 years, the acceptance she'd stopped believing would ever come. "We need to move," she managed. "Can you travel? We can run if we have to." The old man smiled slightly. "We're Apache. We always run when we must." They reached Ironwood Canyon by mid-morning, taking routes only Knox and Red Sky's people knew. The 8 prisoners were immediately absorbed into the Apache community, given food, medical attention, and the kind of fierce protection that came from people who'd lost too much already. Ayesha refused to leave Knox's side. The girl had said perhaps 20 words since her rescue, but her hand stayed locked in her uncle's good one anchor against a world that had proven itself capable of terrible things. Red Sky Walker met them at the edge of the settlement. His old eyes took in the exhausted rescuers and freed prisoners with satisfaction. "The news will spread," he said. "Merrow will know by nightfall that someone freed his captives." "Good." Nietzsche's voice was hard. "I want him to know. I want him to understand that everything he's built is coming apart." "Then you should know he's already moving." Red Sky's expression grew grave. "My scouts report he's calling all his lieutenants back to Whiskey Creek Lodge, every man from every territory. He's consolidating." "Preparing for war," Knox said. "Or preparing to run." Nietzsche studied the horizon, where Whiskey Creek lay beyond her sight. "Either way, it ends soon." As if summoned by the thought, Marshal Rohr Fenwick appeared on horseback, riding hard. His weathered face carried news. "It's done," he announced without preamble. "Federal Marshal from Santa Fe reviewed your evidence. Code books, witness statements, the artifacts stolen from Apache sites." He pulled papers from his saddlebag. "Arrest warrants for Drazen Merrow and 6 lieutenants. Charges including kidnapping, theft, extortion, and violation of federal treaties." "How long until he knows?" Nietzsche asked. He probably knows already. I sent word through official channels. Fenwick dismounted stiffly. Gave him one chance to surrender peacefully. He won't. I know. The marshal's hand rested on his sidearm. That's why I brought a posse. 8 deputies, good men, but probably not enough if Merrow decides to make a stand. Then we give him a reason to surrender. Nietzsche turned to face the people gathering around them. Word had spread fast. Townspeople from Cooperton, Ironwood, and settlements across the territory. Not fighters. Just ordinary people who'd lived under Merrow's shadow too long. Myra Chen was there. Doc Harrigan, Peterson and his family, the stable owner, the seamstress, the bartender. More than 40 people and more arriving every hour. "What are they doing?" Fenwick asked. "Standing up." Knox's voice held wonder. Finally standing up. Myra Chen stepped forward as spokesperson. "We heard what happened at Thunder Mesa. Heard you freed those prisoners." Her eyes were bright with something between fear and determination. "We want to help finish this." "This isn't your fight," Nietzsche started. "It became our fight when Merrow made us choose between paying protection money or losing everything." Doc Harrigan's old hands shook, but his voice was steady. "When he threatened our families, when he turned our homes into prisons where we were too afraid to speak freely." "We're not asking to fight," Father Miguel added. "We're asking to witness, to stand there when you confront him, to show him that we're not afraid anymore." Nietzsche looked at the faces surrounding her, farmers and shopkeepers, mothers and fathers, people who'd never fired a shot in anger, but who'd decided that some things mattered more than safety. "If you come, some of you might die," she said bluntly. "We're dying already," Peterson replied. "Dying slowly under his boot. At least this way we die standing up." The murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. 40 people, 50, more arriving as the day wore on. An army of ordinary folks who'd found something worth the risk. Sam Bridger climbed onto a wagon bed so everyone could see him. "Listen up." His voice carried the authority of a man who'd led soldiers in actual war. "We're not going to Whiskey Creek to kill anyone. We're going as witnesses, as a community saying enough is enough." He pointed at Fenwick. "The marshal has legal warrants. That makes this official. We're backing the law, not replacing it." "But if Merrow resists," someone called out, "then the marshal and his deputies handle it," Sam said firmly. "Our job is to stand there, to be seen, to show Merrow that he doesn't control us anymore." He paused. "And if it comes to fighting, you run. You protect your families. You let the people trained for violence handle the violence." Nietzsche climbed up beside Sam. The crowd quieted, waiting. "Drazen Merrow burned my home because I refused to be controlled," she said. Her voice carried clearly in the desert air. "He thought destroying my livelihood would teach me fear. Instead, it taught me something else." She gestured to the people around her. "It taught me that I'm not alone, that communities are stronger than any one man's cruelty, that ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary courage can change everything." Her hand touched the eagle feather in her hair. "I'm Apache. My people survived the long walk. Fort Sumner. Betrayals and broken promises and attempts to erase us from the land we've walked for generations. We survived because we understood one truth." She paused, making eye contact with as many people as she could. "Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand with you when standing up is the hardest thing in the world. You've become my family, all of you." Ayasha stepped forward from where she'd been hidden in Knox's shadow. The 12-year-old girl was small, malnourished, carrying scars no child should bear, but she stood straight. "He took me," she said in accented English, "kept me in a dark place, made me work until my hands bled." Her young voice carried across the silent crowd. "But my uncle came, and this woman and you." She looked at Nietzsche with eyes older than her years. "You gave me hope. Now I want to watch you take everything from the man who tried to take everything from me." The crowd was absolutely silent. Then someone started clapping, slow at first, then faster. Then everyone joined until the canyon echoed with the sound of ordinary people finding their courage. Fenwick waited until the noise died down. "We ride at dawn tomorrow, Whiskey Creek Lodge. Official arrest backed by federal authority." He looked at Nietzsche. "And witnessed by everyone brave enough to stand behind the law. One condition," Nietzsche said. "I face Drayson Merrow directly, public, where everyone can see and hear. Why? Because he needs to understand who beat him." Nietzsche's eyes were hard. Not a ghost, not some invisible enemy, a woman whose home he burned, an Apache whose people he imprisoned, a widow whose husband believed in justice and taught her that some things are worth fighting for. She turned to address the crowd one final time. "Tomorrow we show Drayson Merrow that his empire was built on sand. That fear only works as long as people stay afraid. That the moment we stand together, he has nothing." As the sun set over Ironwood Canyon, more than 60 people prepared for the ride to Whiskey Creek. Not an army, a community, armed not just with weapons, but with something far more dangerous to men like Drayson Merrow: the absolute conviction that they were done being afraid. Knox found Nietzsche later that evening standing alone, looking toward the western horizon. "You think he'll surrender peacefully?" he asked. "No." Nietzsche's voice was certain. "Drayson Merrow lost his mind at Glorietta Pass. He spent 15 years trying to create order out of the chaos in his head. Tomorrow will prove that order was an illusion. And then he has a choice: face justice or die trying to run from it." She looked at Knox. "Either way, it ends tomorrow. Your husband would be proud." Nietzsche touched the place where her wedding ring used to be sold long ago to buy supplies for the trading post. "Thomas would tell me I'm being reckless. Then he'd kiss me and hand me ammunition." She smiled slightly. "That's what love is. Supporting someone even when you're terrified for them." As night fell over the canyon, 60 people settled in to rest before the dawn ride. Ordinary people about to do an extraordinary thing: stand up to a man who'd terrorized them for years, and prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a rifle or a knife. It's the simple act of refusing to be afraid anymore. Dawn broke over Ironwood Canyon like a promise, or a threat, depending on which side of history you plan to stand. 63 people mounted horses in the early light. Marshal Fenwick and his 8 deputies rode point official and armed. Behind them came the townspeople, farmers and shopkeepers and mothers and fathers who decided that some mornings you wake up different than you went to sleep. Nietzsche Wolfclaw rode near the front, the eagle feather in her hair, catching first light. Knox Tahoma beside her left shoulder, still bandaged, but his right hand steady on his reins. Sam Bridger brought up the rear, his one good hand more capable than most men's two. They looked like a parade or a funeral procession. The line between the two was thinner than most people wanted to admit. The ride to Whiskey Creek took 4 hours through country that grew progressively uglier, beautiful in the way broken things can be all sharp edges and exposed bone, but ugly in what it represented. This was land Drayson Merrow controlled through fear and violence, where settlements paid tribute and travelers kept their heads down. But not today. Today, 63 people rode through Merrow's territory like they owned it, because they were done pretending they didn't. They saw the smoke from Whiskey Creek Lodge 2 miles out, not the smoke of destruction, just cook fires and chimney exhaust from a compound that had grown fat on stolen prosperity. The lodge itself squatted in a valley like a spider in its web. 2 stories of timber and stone built with money extorted from people who couldn't afford to say no. Corrals, outbuildings, everything maintained with military precision because Drayson Merrow believed order was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. What he'd never understood was that sometimes order itself could be the chaos. As they rode closer, figures appeared on the lodge's wide porch. Drayson Merrow stood center, flanked by his brother Kellen and 5 other lieutenants. 20 more men spread across the property, armed and watching. But it was Drayson who commanded attention. 54 years old and still carrying himself like the cavalry officer he'd been before the war broke him. Clean-shaven, uniform pressed, every button polished. The kind of desperate control that screamed louder than any disorder. Marshal Fenwick raised his hand. The 63 riders stopped 100 yards out, close enough to be heard but far enough to avoid provocation. "Drazen Marrow," Fenwick's voice carried across the valley. "I'm here under federal authority with warrants for your arrest and the arrest of 6 others. Charges include kidnapping, extortion, theft of federal property, and violation of treaty agreements with Apache territories." Silence. Then Drazen's laugh echoed across the space between them. Not humor, something colder. "You brought farmers and shopkeepers to arrest me, Marshal?" "How very democratic." "I brought witnesses," Fenwick replied calmly. "People willing to testify about your activities, about protection money demanded, about Apache prisoners held illegally, about artifacts stolen from protected sites." Drazen's smile never wavered, but his hands tightened on the porch railing. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is open territory. Federal warrants extend everywhere, Marrow. You know that." Fenwick shifted in his saddle. "You can surrender peacefully or resist. Choice is yours." "I've spent 15 years building order in this chaos." Drazen's voice rose slightly, that careful control starting to crack. "Teaching discipline, imposing structure. You think some farmers and a widow are going to undo that?" Nietzsche urged her horse forward, slowly. No threatening moves, just a woman riding to where she could be clearly seen. "The widow would like a word," she said. Every eye turned to her. Drazen's face went absolutely still as recognition hit. "You," the word came out strangled. "The trading post woman, Apache trash who thought she could refuse my protection. My name is Nietzsche Wolfclaw." Her voice carried clearly. "You burned my home 15 days ago, destroyed the last thing my husband and I built together. You thought that would teach me to fear you." She dismounted, walked forward alone until she stood 50 yards from his porch, visible to everyone. "Instead, you taught me something else. You showed me that men like you only have power as long as people believe you do. The moment we stop believing, you're just a scared old man wearing a dead soldier's uniform." Drazen's face flushed. "I am a colonel in the Confederate Army." "You were." Nietzsche's tone was almost gentle. 20 years ago, before Glorieta Pass. Before you watched your entire company die while you survived. Before the guilt broke something inside you that never healed. You know nothing about me. I know everything about you." Nietzsche pulled papers from her coat. "The code book stolen from Vetch Calder. Intelligence gathered over weeks. I know you were at Fort Sumner in '66. I know you believed controlling Apache people would prevent future violence. I know you convinced yourself that cruelty in the name of order was mercy." She took another step forward. "And I know that somewhere in your broken mind you still think you're the hero of this story." The crowd behind her was absolutely silent, 63 people bearing witness to a confrontation that would define how this territory remembered this day. Kellen Marrow shifted uncomfortably on the porch. "Brother, maybe we should—" "Shut up." Drazen's voice was tight. "She's Apache. They lie. They manipulate. I know their tricks." "You don't know anything." Nietzsche's voice hardened. "You see threats in every shadow because you're terrified. Terrified that if you stop controlling everything, the chaos you saw at Glorieta Pass will come back." She spread her arms encompassing the 63 riders behind her. "Look at them. Farmers, mothers, shopkeepers, fathers. Are they chaos or are they just people tired of being controlled?" Drazen descended the porch steps. His hand rested on his sidearm but hadn't drawn yet. "You think you've won bringing these sheep to my door? I don't think anything. I know." Nietzsche's eyes never left his. "I know about Thunder Mesa, about the 8 prisoners you held illegally, including a 12-year-old girl." Ayasha stepped forward from the crowd on cue, small, malnourished, but standing straight. "You took me from my home," the girl said in her accented English. "Made me work until I bled. Told me I was worthless, savage, less than human." Her young voice carried absolute conviction. "But you were wrong. I'm Apache. We survived things that would have killed men like you, and we're still here." Something in Drayson's face cracked. That careful control slipping. They needed discipline, structure, someone to teach them civilization. "You needed to feel powerful," Nietzsche corrected, "after the war took your power away. After Glorieta Pass made you feel helpless. You spent 15 years trying to rebuild control over a world that doesn't work that way." She took another step, close enough now that she could see the tremor in his hands, the sweat on his forehead, the desperation in his eyes. "I understand you," she said quietly. "The war broke you, the same way it broke thousands of men on both sides. But you chose to become a monster. Others chose differently." From her coat she pulled one more item, a photograph. Thomas Ashcroft in his Union cavalry uniform, young and smiling. "This was my husband, Union officer. He fought at Glorieta Pass too, on the other side. He survived when his friends died." Nietzsche's voice softened. The war haunted him every day, but he chose to build instead of destroy, to create instead of control, to love instead of fear. She held the photograph where Drayson could see it. "You and Thomas both survived battles that killed better men. You both carried guilt and nightmares. But Thomas became someone who made the world gentler, and you became this." Drayson's hand shook on his pistol. "Don't you dare compare me to some Union. I'm not comparing, I'm contrasting." Nietzsche pocketed the photograph. "Thomas taught me that we choose who we become after the war ends. You chose this, and now you face the consequences." The crowd behind her stayed absolutely still. Marshal Fenwick's hand rested on his own weapon, ready but not threatening. The townspeople watched with the kind of attention people give to moments that change history. Kellen Merrow spoke into the silence. "Brother, please. They have federal warrants. They have witnesses. They have evidence." His voice cracked. "It's over." "It's not over." Drayson's shout echoed off the surrounding hills. "I built this. I created order from chaos. His voice broke. The tremor in his hands spread to his whole body, and suddenly he wasn't a terrifying gang leader anymore. Just a 54-year-old man who'd spent 15 years running from ghosts and had finally been cornered by them. "They all died," he whispered. "At Glorieta Pass. All of them. My entire company. I watched them fall and I survived, and I couldn't understand why." "So you spent 15 years trying to prove you deserved to survive." Nietzsche's tone held no triumph, just sad understanding. "By controlling everything, everyone, making yourself necessary through fear." Drayson looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and processed too little. "You understand." "I understand that trauma breaks people in different ways," Nietzsche gestured to the crowd. "But look around. You're not the only one who survived terrible things. Every person here has lost someone, buried friends, watched the world take more than it gave." She pointed to Myra Chen. "She lost her husband to railroad accidents and kept going, raised a family anyway." To Doc Harrigan, "He treated wounds that would give surgeons nightmares and still wakes up believing in healing." To Sam Bridger, "He lost his hand at Shiloh and learned to build beautiful things with what remained." To Knox and Ayasha, "They lost family at Fort Sumner, at your order, and they're still standing here choosing justice over revenge." Her voice rose, carrying to everyone. "We all survived things that could have broken us. The difference is we chose to survive together. You chose to survive alone, and that made you weak." The words hit Drayson like physical blows. His knees buckled. He caught himself on the porch railing. "I don't know how to stop," he whispered. "Then let us help you." Nietzsche extended her hand, not in friendship, in mercy. "Surrender, face justice, accept that control was always an illusion, and the only thing that matters is how we treat each other when we're all broken." For a long moment Drayson stared at her outstretched hand. Behind him, his lieutenants watched. Behind her, 63 witnesses held their breath. Then slowly Drayson Merrow unbuckled his gun belt, let it fall, and collapsed to his knees in the dirt. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "God help me, I'm so sorry." Marshal Fenwick moved forward with his deputies. No violence, no dramatic arrests, just the quiet efficiency of lawmen who'd done this before. As they placed irons on Drayson's wrists, he looked up at Nietzsche one more time. "You're Mesa Ghost, the weapons designer. I read about you in the war reports." "I was. You could have killed me a dozen times. From the shadows, from distance. Why didn't you—" Nietzsche looked at him with something that might have been pity. "Because you needed to face what you'd become. And because these people needed to see that monsters can be defeated without becoming monsters ourselves." She turned to address the crowd. "Drayson Marrow terrorized 3 territories because we let him, because we were afraid, because we thought one person couldn't make a difference." Her voice strengthened. "But look what happened when we stood together, when we chose courage over fear, when we decided that some things matter more than safety." Father Miguel stepped forward. "What happens now? Now the law takes over." Marshal Fenwick helped Drayson to his feet. "He'll face trial in Santa Fe, federal court. Witnesses will testify. Justice will be served properly." "And his men," someone called out. Fenwick looked at the lieutenants on the porch. Most had already dropped their weapons. "Those who surrender peacefully will face lesser charges. Those who resist will face the consequences of that choice." Kellen Marrow was the first to step forward, hands raised. "I surrender. My brother is sick, has been for years. I should have stopped him. I'm guilty of that if nothing else." One by one the other lieutenants followed. Within 10 minutes the entire Dread Marrow gang command structure was in custody. No shots fired, no blood spilled. Just broken men facing the reality they'd tried to outrun. The townspeople didn't cheer. This wasn't a victory that called for celebration. Just quiet relief that finally, after years of fear, they could breathe. Nietzsche found Knox standing with Ayesha, the girl still clinging to her uncle. "You did good," she told him. "We did good." Knox looked at the surrendering gang members. "All of us." "Yes." Nietzsche touched the eagle feather in her hair. "All of us." 6 months later, autumn painted Ironwood Canyon in shades of gold and crimson. The trading post stood rebuilt larger than before, with architectural details that honored both Apache and American traditions. A fusion of worlds like The Woman Who Owned It. Nietzsche Wolfclaw stood on the porch watching the sun set over country that felt different than it had half a year ago. Freer, like the land itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The trial had lasted 3 weeks. Drayson Marrow was sentenced to life imprisonment at a federal facility where they specialized in treating soldiers whose minds had broken in service. Not freedom, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that sometimes punishment needed to include healing. Kellen Marrow had received 10 years, most of which would be served helping rebuild communities his brother's gang had damaged. The other lieutenants faced various sentences, all designed to restore rather than simply punish. And the 63 witnesses who'd ridden to Whiskey Creek, they'd become local heroes, people who'd shown that ordinary folks could change history if they found the courage to stand together. Knox approached from the direction of the new schoolhouse, Ayesha walking beside him. The girl had gained weight, started smiling again, even laughed sometimes. Healing was slow, but it was happening. "The council asked if you'd speak at the Harvest Festival," Knox said. "About what happened, what we did. What should I tell them? The truth." Knox smiled. "That we were terrified and did it anyway." Nietzsche was about to respond when a stranger rode up, 40-something weathered by travel, with the look of a man who'd seen too much territory and not enough hope. "Looking for someone called Mesa Ghost," the stranger said. "Was told she might be here." "That name's retired." Nietzsche didn't move from her porch. "I'm just Nietzsche now, shopkeeper. Occasionally helps with community matters." "Community matters." The stranger smiled slightly. "Is that what you call freeing prisoners and taking down criminal empires? I call it doing what needed doing." The stranger dismounted, approached carefully. "I'm from Arizona Territory. We have a situation. Mining companies moving onto Apache land illegally. Territorial government looking the other way. People getting hurt." He pulled papers from his saddlebag, maps, reports, the kind of intelligence that suggested he'd done his homework. We heard what happened here, how you organized a community to stand against someone who seemed unbeatable. We're hoping, he paused, we're hoping you might teach us how to do the same. Nietzsche looked at the papers, at the stranger's hopeful face, at Knox and Ayesha watching her. I'm not a revolutionary, she said carefully. I'm not building an army or starting a movement. We're not asking for that. The stranger's voice was earnest. We're asking for advice, for someone to show us that resistance is possible, that ordinary people can make a difference if they're organized and determined. Nietzsche thought about Thomas, about his belief that people could be better than their worst moments, about the 63 writers who'd proven him right. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I can't leave immediately. I have responsibilities here. Of course. The stranger mounted his horse. I'll be at the hotel in town, whenever you're ready to talk. After he left, Knox raised an eyebrow. You're going to help them? Maybe. Nietzsche watched the dust from the stranger's departure settle. Or maybe I'll just teach them what I learned here, that you don't need a ghost or a hero, you just need people willing to stand together. Either way, trouble's coming looking for you again. Trouble's always looking for someone. Nietzsche turned back toward her trading post. The question is whether you hide when it arrives or whether you meet it at the door. Ayesha spoke up, her young voice stronger than it had been. My teacher says you're the bravest person in the territory. Your teacher is kind but wrong. Nietzsche knelt to meet the girl's eyes. The bravest people are the ones who survive terrible things and keep living anyway, who wake up every morning and choose kindness when the world gives them reasons to choose hate. She touched the girl's hair gently. You're braver than I'll ever be. As the sun dropped below the canyon rim, painting the sky in colors that had no names, Nietzsche stood surrounded by family. Not blood, but chosen. Knox and Ayesha, Sam emerging from his forge, Father Miguel arriving for dinner, Myra Chen bringing food because she believed no one should eat alone. The vaults still existed, hidden throughout the canyon. The weapons still waited, maintained and ready, because Nietzsche Wolfclaw had learned that sometimes peace required the capacity for war. But more importantly, she'd learned that the strongest weapon wasn't a rifle or a knife. It was people standing together, refusing to be afraid, choosing community over isolation. Thomas had believed that. He'd died believing it, and Nietzsche had proved him right. You think you'll help the Arizona people? Sam asked over dinner, his one hand as capable as ever. I think I'll teach them what we learned. Nietzsche looked around the table at faces that had become her world. That you don't fight tyranny with bigger tyranny. You fight it by building something better, something worth protecting. And if building isn't enough, Nietzsche smiled slightly, the kind of smile that held years of hard-earned wisdom, then you remember that sometimes the woman who knows how to destroy is the one best positioned to protect what matters. She raised her glass. To Thomas, who taught me to build. To my people who taught me to survive. To all of you who taught me that family is what you choose, not what you're born into. They drank. They ate. They laughed and told stories as darkness fell over Ironwood Canyon. And somewhere in the vault beneath the trading post, weapons waited. Not for conquest, not for revenge, but for the next time ordinary people needed someone to show them that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to stand anyway. Nietzsche touched the eagle feather woven into her braid, feeling its weight. Once she'd been torn between two worlds belonging to neither. Now she understood what Thomas had tried to teach her all along. You didn't have to choose between worlds. You built a bridge and invited people to cross. Some would, some wouldn't. But the bridge would stand, and that was enough, because some things are worth protecting, some people are worth fighting for, and sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is a woman who knows exactly what she's fighting for and has nothing left to lose except the future she's trying to build. Drayson Merrow had learned that lesson too late. But somewhere in Arizona, mining companies were about to learn it just in time. The canyon held its breath. The stars wheeled overhead, and Naiche Wolfclaw, widow, shopkeeper, and ghost, when necessary, settled in to enjoy an evening with family. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own choices. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. And sometimes peace was the greatest victory of all. The end. But also in the way of all good stories, just the beginning.